We're in the midst of a new multi-part series on everyone's favorite theme, personal evangelism. This is as fun as talking about fasting to most people. Suffering. I have to share my faith. We'll talk about that. It's my hope that this teaching will be transformative. All lies this way. Can I have a pastor moment for a second? New Life has a lot of strengths and weaknesses. I am intimately attuned to them because I'm here a lot. I would say our greatest area of weakness is what we're going to be discussing. The individual believer being deployed to do the work of the Lord in their context. Most people think that the greatest work of the church is some family fun day or big outreach. It's not. That's once a year, maybe twice. You might reach 150, 200 people. Gang, we reach 1,000 a week at a minimum with all the people that we interact with. The greatest ministry of any local church will be the individual believers representing Jesus out amongst those who don't know him. You need to get that, because this is not one of those operations where, oh, the pastor does the ministry. No. It's my job to equip and train you, hence moments like this. But I cannot replace you. I can't tag along with each of you. I think of all the different towns that are represented here. I did the math one day. It's like 13 to 15 different towns that we hail from. It's a small assembly. All the people that you engage in each week, I don't see them. You don't see mine. I don't talk to your family or families. I don't know your neighbors. But you know who does? You. And the Lord is uniquely calling you to represent him in those contexts. Matthew 28. Let's pick it up in verse 19. This is following the resurrection of the Lord. He calls the group together, the apostolic band. And he says, go and make disciples. Verse 19, a couple of words in. Go and make disciples. Go and make disciples. Key word there is go. Not sit and wait. They'll come to you. The day may have existed in the American culture where people just went to church because it was a part of a religious routine and they had an interest in Jesus because their parents had an interest in Jesus and their grandparents. Those days are gone. Gone. Among the younger populations, you're lucky if 2 to 4% are engaged at all. And the call isn't for us to hope they eventually cross our thresholds. It's for us to go. And in the going, to do what? To make disciples, to raise up followers and students of Jesus. Baptizing them, of course. Verse 20, making them to obey all or everything that I have commanded you. Gang, that's a big work. That is a global work. Go where? Go and make disciples where? All nations, without exception. Every people group in your own time, read Mark 16, because Mark 16 concludes with, go into all the world. How much of the world? All of it. And preach the gospel to which part of creation? All of it. And whoever believes and is baptized will be saved. Whoever doesn't believe will be what? Condemned. Let me ask you a few questions. Are you ready? How many have heard of the Great Commission of Jesus before? Go into all the world and make disciples, preach the gospel. Who's heard of that? Keep your hands up. How many believe you are personally responsible for playing a role in that? How many believe that there are eternal stakes in play? Do you think people are going to get saved by accident? Just by osmosis that they're going to... No. Keep your hands up if you want. How many struggle in actually doing this, though? Here's the question, and hands can go down. Why? I want your mind to begin to go down that particular avenue. If you know that you're called to go and preach and make disciples, and if you know that there are eternal stakes in play, and you know that you have a role to execute or to fulfill in the outward plan, why do we, I won't just say you, I'll put myself in there as a representative of the body, why do we struggle in actually doing it? I want to spend some time this morning introducing a research study that was done. It was conducted by Jesus Films Project Multi-Generational Survey on Evangelism. The link is in the notes. You can read the entirety of it in your own time. In this study, 1,600 professing Christians, that's a pretty good number, 1,600, professing believers were asked questions regarding the sharing of their faith. Questions like the following: how do you share your faith? How important is it that you share your faith with other people? How often do you talk about spiritual matters with the following types of people? People who share your beliefs, people who don't. I want to present to you a series of slides. It's a busy morning for you, Tim, but I trust your ability. If you're at home, you won't be able to really see these, but you can just kind of tune in. We're going to go a piece at a time, slowly. I am not in a rush, except for the funeral, which I want you to be timely for. Let's go to the first slide. The research group asked the question, and maybe you have a hard time seeing it. I have it in front of me. How often do you talk about spiritual matters with people who share your beliefs? And if you look at the very bottom, you'll see a number of age groups: 18 to 24, 25 to 34, 35 to 44, 45 to 54, 55 to 64, and then 65 plus, the elders amongst us. When you look at that, I want you to look at the breakdown of of how comfortable they are, how often they talk about sharing their faith, ranging from never to all the time. 86% of young people, I did the math, ages 18 to 24, were inclined to talking about their faith with people who similarly shared it. That's ranking 3, 4, and 5. You add those together, you get about 86. That's a pretty good number. Who's in 18 to 24? Raise a hand. John, I know you are. There's a couple of you out there, a few downstairs. Your group is extremely open about sharing your faith. It's no surprise that someone like John might talk to Orion about things that they believe. Next age group up, it's 89%. How many of you are 25 to 34? Raise a hand. Your group is very open to talking about people like you, people that you might sit next to. Sean, did your hand go up for 25 to 34? You're going to lie in church? God bless you. Ages 35 to 44. How many of you are here? Raise a hand. 85% of you are inclined to openly talk about your faith with people that seem to share it. 45 to 54. That's now my range. I'm turning 46 this week. 85% of people my age. I'll talk to you about my faith. 55 to 64, raise a hand. Now Sean's hand goes up. 89% of you, very open to sharing Jesus with people that already know him. Isn't that wonderful? Next group, 65 and older. Not me, but I'm just asking you to raise your hand. 91% of y'all, you're very open. You're the most open of the group. You love talking about Jesus. Again, it's not a ton more, 85 to 91%, but you see that on average, a lot of believers are very open to talking about Jesus with other believers. Less than 13% on average of all age ranges were inclined to be quiet. Now, let's go to the next slide. How often do you talk about spiritual matters with people that don't agree with you or seem not to? Do you see a shift? Let's do some math. 43% of young people, 18 to 24, were openly inclined to openly share their faith with non-believers. That's a drop from 86%. So it's halved. 53% of young adults, 25 to 34, were willing to share with non-believers versus 89%. 51% of adults, 35 to 54, were inclined to openly share their faith versus the earlier 85. Half of adults, 45 to 54, and half of those 55 to 64 would be willing to openly share their faith with people that don't share it. But this means that on average, just about half of the people, professing believers who were aware of the Great Commission, knew the stakes, and recognized their personal responsibility to share. Half just chose to be quiet. Christians tend to go silent around the very people they're called to reach. Think about that. Gang, half of the body of Christ is MIA for the one task we're called to do. Primarily, the work of the church is to preach the gospel and make disciples, correct? Or am I wrong? Am I wrong, or is Matthew 28 and Mark 16 pretty clear? Half of us. No, I'm good. We're so concerned about the condition of the lost, I'm concerned about the condition of the found. You see, gang, I don't really lose a lot of sleep over the lost acting lost. But us? It leads me to wonder, do we even know him? That's a hard question, isn't it? You see, it's time for the Church of Jesus Christ, if it's ever going to rise up in this nation, it's got to be now. I mean this sincerely, because if we don't, will there be a nation? Please don't tell me you think it's going to go on like it is forever. Please don't tell me that. I'm the eternal optimist, and even I'm like, it's looking a little shaky. The events of the past week alone should be an eye-opening moment. For those who don't know what happened this past week in our nation, I almost envy you. I want to talk about why. Why is it the case that we tend to go quiet? Why do you? And based upon the survey and the research, there were a number of very common themes. And I'm going to break them down. I'm not going to have time to explore them this morning. We're going to do a part 2 of this next week, where I'm going to present to you the whole thing, and then we're going to really deconstruct it a bit next week. So if you don't like today, you're not going to like next week. But if you don't like, all lies this way, if you don't like today, you need to spend some time with the Lord and figure out why. Because if he told us to do something and we're not, that does not lead to good conclusions. Something's wrong under the hood. Let's talk about why Christians are hindered. Point number 1 should be on the screen. Go ahead, my young apprentice, who's just about my age. 22% of the respondents noted or cited fear as the driving factor in terms of why they stayed silent. 1 in 5. That if they had to give a reason, now again, there were more people than just 22 who were afraid, but if they had to give a driving reason, the number one reason why they stay silent, 1 in 5 or just over 1 in 5 said fear. Now, as we go on in the study, you're going to see fear rear its head at different points. Let me share a few things from the study. When it came to talking about other people, or to other people about the gospel, fear was far and away the most significant deterrent. People communicated they were afraid of losing valuable relationships and wanted to avoid the tensions that accompanied the types of discussions that Christianity might bring up. Others felt ill-equipped. They liked to share more, but they were afraid that they would end up having to field questions that they weren't ready to contend with. According to the researchers, fear is the common thread that weaves together many of the different responses that we're going to cover. Respondents often use words like fear, scared, or afraid to describe their feelings about other reasons they don't talk about spiritual matters. Fear, I'm afraid. I'm afraid. I'm in the context of the non-believers. Jesus has called me to share the gospel and make him known with word and with deed. And when the time comes to do that and he opens the door, I don't go through it because I'm afraid. Ever feel that? Ever feel that sense of fear? It's real. The issue isn't you should feel bad because you're afraid. It's what do you do as you're afraid? We'll talk about that some more next week. Let's go to the next one. 17% noted the lack of opportunity to share their faith as the driving hindrance. Many people responded that the ideal moments it seldom seemed to present itself. You know, I'm willing to share my faith, I just never really see any open doors to do so. 17%, just about a little bit less than 1 in 5. That even if they're willing, as they're out in the highways and byways of life, they just don't see the appropriate way to do it, to bring it up. For some in the study, physical hardship, and this is legitimate to a degree, made it difficult to get out and to share with others and interact. Most communicated the circumstances just never really seemed right. We'll talk about this next week, but can I ask you, how right does it have to be for you to talk about the Lord? Think about that. I'm talking to myself. This is all inwardly focused. The Lord is challenging me. You just happen to be getting the overflow. I like the next one, but it's frightening. Another 17% noted that they felt no hindrance in the sharing of their faith. When they were asked, what hinders you from sharing the gospel, just less than 1 in 5 said, nothing. I'm at liberty to do so. I don't feel any particular resistance. I just go forth and do, which is really cool that many people, 17%, are willing to just go forth and make disciples and preach the gospel. You know what the frightening part of that is? That only means 17% of the body of Christ is actually freely doing the work. That means 83% of us find it really hard to excuse not sharing Jesus. Again, most of the church is just kind of MIA. Moving quickly, the next one, 10% of respondents cited the feeling of being ill-equipped as the driving hindrance to the sharing of their faith. I don't feel equipped to share my faith. Maybe they were afraid of someone asking them a question that they didn't really know how to answer. They were afraid that if they were put on the spot and a spotlight was shined upon them, how do I respond? What do I say? What do I do? How do I perform in the moment? As the survey said, they stated that they worried about fielding questions that they couldn't answer, and they felt like they didn't have the corresponding degree of biblical knowledge. Maybe someday if I just know enough and I'm just trained enough, then I'll begin to serve Jesus. I'm hoping that as I'm sharing these, because I'm not really unpacking them much yet, I'm hoping that in your mind you're saying, yes, I understand that I can empathize, but does that really hold weight biblically? Think about that. All the reasons I've given so far, we understand them as humans, fellow humans and peers, we can empathize with it. But do they really hold biblical weight? Can I give you the answer ahead of time? They don't. Next one. 9% cited the disinterest or the perceived disinterest of others as being the driving hindrance in the sharing of their faith. Basically, people just presume the people around me don't really want to hear about spiritual things. They don't want to hear about Jesus. They don't want to hear about the good news. They don't want to hear about freedom from sin. They don't want to hear about things like heaven and hell. They're not interested. So based on that presupposition and assumption, I just choose to be quiet, because anything that I venture to say, they're not really going to receive it or care about it anyway. I'm going to have fun unpacking that one next week. You see, the problem with me is I've lived with this for a couple of weeks now, so my heart and mind are just doing this. Now, if you're like that and you find your brain and your heart going to Bible verses, wonderful. Chew on it. Let the Lord speak to you. If you're not and you're just kind of like, you don't know fully what to do with this, just absorb the background of the material and the essence of it. Next one, 8% of respondents, and this is a manifestation of the fear we noted earlier, they cited particularly the fear of rejection as the primary hindrance in the sharing of their faith. They're in a context where they could share. They might be able to perceive open doors whereby they could share, but they're just so afraid of being rejected. Someone say something about me. Again, the loss of a relationship or having that tension that nobody wants, in a sense. How many of you love to be rejected? You just wake up in the morning saying, God, I just pray that today somebody would reject and oppose me. Oh, that would be wonderful. No, we're humans. We're people pleasers. Most of us, the vast majority of people are people pleasers. There's always the weird 1% that are just wired quite differently. That fear of man. What does the Bible say about the fear of man? We'll talk about that. It's a snare. It traps us. It paralyzes us. Without what, it's impossible to please God. You know what the antithesis of faith is? Fear. It's a paralytic. Faith is innervating. It picks us up. It quickens us. It causes us to move, to go forth, and to do great things in the Lord's name. When you're afraid, you know what you do? Nothing. And in particular, this fear is the fear of rejection. Now, similarly, the next slide, the fear of hostility. It's similar, but it's the extra degree. It's not just a little bit of tension. What if they genuinely turn hostile against me? Now, you may not see that a lot in the U.S., but if you're overseas and you start talking freely about Jesus, they might just pick up stones. I think I shared the story recently. I was listening to one of my Bible school professors. He was the worship leader at the revival that Misty and I met at down in Brownsville. Well, it feels like 100 years ago, but 1995 to 2000. And he was speaking with the primary evangelist, and toward the end of the evangelist's life, because he passed away from skin cancer, they were in the office, and Steve Hill, who was the evangelist, he says, "Lyndall," that was the worship leader, "come here for a second. I want you to see something." And he had a photograph of a young man in an Islamic nation. I don't know which one offhand. But upon the professing of the faith, his family cut his arms off. Yeah, I'll keep it G-rated as much as I can, but that's what happened. The family turned hostile. He professed Jesus, was baptized, and that was it. And in the photograph, you don't see, if the TVs are dead, just leave them out. I'm going to put it all in the Ware River. I'm going to follow Fran Gromelsky's heart's desire just to get rid of all the technology. Next week, I'll have a djembe, and I'm going to allow tambourines. But in the picture, this young man who had no arms, he wasn't downcast looking or broken. He was smiling. He was radiating with Christ. And Steve Hill, the evangelist, someone that we loved, man of God, he said, "Lyndall, what if I'm at the marriage supper of the Lamb and I'm seated next to this guy who he was willing to endure having his arms cut off, and he was still willing to preach and show Jesus? What do I say to a person like that?" And this is a guy that preached to millions, reached hundreds of thousands, if not millions. You see, this was someone that overcame their fear of hostility. We're so afraid of people not liking us, giving us a hard time. Well, that's 8%, just about 1 in 10, a particular fear. Moving along, 8% of other respondents cited a packed schedule as being the primary reason why they couldn't share their faith. A large number of people said they just didn't have the time needed to make the gospel known. It's too time-consuming, and their lives are busy enough as it is. Everybody say, "I'm busy. I'm busy." For many, that is the biggest excuse as to why they have no time to do any kingdom work. I'm busy. We'll pick up on that one next week. Next week's going to be hard. It just is, because we have to look at these and say, okay, in light of Scripture, what do we do? Moving to a close, 4% of respondents, if the TVs are still with me, cited personal shyness as the driving reason as to why they couldn't share their faith. I'm just too shy. I don't like people. I don't like talking in front of people. The new word everybody uses these days, and it's real, I'm not dogging you, but I'm an introvert. People I can only be around so much, and I get that. I'm married to one. But the reality is, our personal quirks don't dismiss us. I'm just too shy. Gang, do you think I want to be up here talking? You think this was my idea? When the Lord first called me, I was tremendously shy. I told the Lord, "You got the wrong person. There are people out there far better at talking and communicating than I am." That's good, but I didn't call them. Shyness. I'm just too shy. Sean Barry, you struggle with that one, right? You're an awfully shy man. Just about done. 4%, the next one, cited the lack of appropriate contexts, or time is the driving hindrance. In other words, many people said that they didn't share their faith because it felt inappropriate to do so. They didn't want to share their faith at work or feel like their relationships were in a healthy enough place to really make Jesus known. And that one does take some wisdom. We'll talk about that next week. Your boss may not love you coming in with a robe and a huge Bible talking about Jesus. That does not mean there aren't ways to do it. 4% cited the difficulty in bringing the topic up in the first place as the primary reason why they stayed silent. How do I steer a conversation toward Jesus? How do I even broach the topic? What do I say to begin the conversation moving in a Christward direction? To people that struggle with that, sharing their faith almost seems impossible. How does it just come up in conversation? What do I do? I'd be willing to share my faith if I even knew how to introduce it into the people's conversation that I'm speaking with. 3%, moving really quickly now, said they did not share their faith primarily due to the fear of being overly pushy. I don't want to be seen as being pushy. I don't want to be that person at work or that neighbor that people look at, oh, you're just always shoving it down my throat, and I get that. And a lot of Christians do this poorly, and they are, frankly, pushy. However, can I be honest with you for a second? Great. I've been honest the entire time. This world is more than happy to shove its value system down your throat. They have no problem talking out loud. And if you don't agree and toe the line, they have no problem calling you out on that publicly. We live in interesting times. Next one, I believe this is the last one. 3% said they didn't share their faith in Christ primarily. Again, of all the reasons, the number one reason for some of them was the fear of offending other people. You know, I really want to make Jesus known, but I don't want to offend. I don't want to say something that is going to bother them and hurt their fifis, their feelings. We're a generation that could use some hurt feelings. When did we get so delicate? Everybody's a Fabergé egg these days. You look at someone wrong, they start crying over it. I'm not knocking the place of feelings. I'm knocking the idolatry associated with them. We've put feelings on such a pedestal, we've taken Jesus off of his. In that way, truth has taken not even just a back seat, it's like tied up in the trunk somewhere. It's just looking to bust out. There's one more slide. This is what we're going to spend all next week on. It's just the breakdown of all that we have seen. A lot of reasons not to do it. What did Jesus say? Go into all the world and preach the gospel to all creation. Go and make disciples of all nations. Well, there's about 13 reasons why we don't. Be honest for a second. By the raising of a hand, how many of you can relate to even one of those? One or more? How many? My hands are up. Just both of mine are up. I'm not dogging you. Both of mine are up. But I have to hold the microphone. How many know that they've not shared the gospel when God had opened doors because of one of those reasons? God set the context and you just chose to be quiet because of that. Next week, we continue. We're going to take each of those and we're going to look at them from a biblical lens or through a biblical lens. And we're going to wrestle with, okay, I'm afraid. Is that an adequate or sufficient enough reason? I lack opportunity. I feel unequipped. I'm afraid of rejection. I'm afraid of hostility. I'm afraid of offending and saying the wrong thing. We're going to see how much weight these actually hold. And here's the goal. For this assembly to get over itself in a good way and to say, Lord, You've called us to actually reach people. And whatever gets in the way, we're going to deal with it. And we're going to let that thing be buried, and we're going to go forth, and we're going to make you known, however that looks. Wouldn't it be amazing if 2 months from now there's 5 to 10 new believers who came because you shared the gospel? It's how it's meant to work. It's how it's meant to work. Next Sunday we'll go deeper. For homework, which one do you most align with? I want you to chew on that. Which one or two or three? Top 2 or 3. If you were asked what gets in your way, what is it? I promise you, if you entertain that conversation, the Spirit of God within you is going to have some talks and say, baby, I love you, but let's work on this. Let me empower you so that you might be witnesses in your Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, in your end of the earth. Go into all the world, preach the gospel, go and make disciples of all nations.